All right, guys, welcome back to the Master Club room, and can't wait to see you guys up here in person. Hopefully, sometime soon we'll make that happen and be able to be all together, and I'll get to see your smiling faces live. Okay, the photos are great, but looking forward to seeing everybody live and in person. Genesis 41 in your Bibles. Genesis 41. Last week we talked about Joseph, and I kind of left you hanging that Joseph was forgotten in the prison, but it didn't change God's goodness, because God's goodness is based on the fact that He's with us, not what takes place around us. And Joseph was forgotten in the prison. He was favored of his father. He was hated by his brothers. He was sold, lied about, sold again, favored, lied about, favored again. And he was in prison, favored again, and then forgotten about by the chief butler who he had helped. And Joseph specifically said, when you get to Pharaoh, remember who I am, and the butler forgot. So Genesis 41, and we'll pick back up in the story. We're going to read down through verse 8, and then we'll continue. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. There we are, dreams again. They keep kind of following Joseph. But it's been 2 years since the butler's been out of prison. Joseph's been in prison 2 more years because the butler forgot about him. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. So we've got 7 cows coming out of the river. Verse 3, and behold, 7 other kine cows came up out after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed. So we've got sturdy-looking cows coming out of the river, and now we've got really scrawny cows coming out of the river. And stood by the other kine, and the ill-favored and lean-fleshed, verse 4, did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. Whoa, what is going on? So I've got cows coming out of the river, and then the skinny ones are eating up the big ones. That doesn't make any sense. So Pharaoh awoke. Verse 5, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. So we've got good-looking corn, and then we've got, you ever been in the grocery store, maybe with your mom and dad, and maybe they're picking out vegetables or fruits, and they're looking at them and seeing, and you can tell, oh, that one looks really good. That one doesn't look good, okay? And what do you normally take? You take the good kind, right? You leave the bad one. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Verse 8, and it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So now we're back here, we're back in Egypt. Pharaoh now is dreaming a dream. Joseph's had a dream, and then the chief butler and the chief baker had a dream, and now Pharaoh has 2 dreams, and he calls all his people together. He's troubled by it. I don't know what these mean. I don't understand them. So he brings people to him and says, I want you to tell me what they mean. And people over here are like, I don't know. I'm not sure what it means. Pharaoh, we're sorry. And Pharaoh was very upset. And all of a sudden, somebody remembers something extremely important. The butler goes, oh, there's a guy. Yes. So he comes to Pharaoh and says, Pharaoh, there's someone that can interpret dreams, and he kind of gives him the backstory. This is what happened, and remember you were mad at us and you cast us into prison. Well, this guy told us that 3 days I was going to be restored, and it happened. I came back to work in the palace. The baker was, you hung him, you killed him. So Pharaoh says, let's get this guy coming in. So it says that quickly they went and got Joseph. It wasn't like, hey, okay, what time works? Maybe next week. This all happened super quick. So Joseph comes, and they get him ready to go before he's been in the prison. So they had to get him ready to go before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I hear that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, well, dreams, the interpretations belong to God. That comes from God. That's not anything in me. Pharaoh, tell me what your dream is. So Pharaoh tells him the dream, and Joseph says, oh boy, okay, so this is what the dream means. The 7 in both dreams are the same. In 7 years, all right, we're going to have 7 years of really good harvest. I mean, there's going to be a lot of food, a lot happening. It's going to be great. But after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. There's going to be 7 years where it's going to be no food, and it's going to be so bad that even the remembrance of the good years won't even be there. So Joseph was remembered by the chief butler, and he comes and gives the interpretation to Joseph. Joseph gives the interpretation to Pharaoh. So Joseph then tells Pharaoh, says, you need to seek someone out that can kind of be in charge of a nationwide food program. So we'll bring the food in and during the 7 good years, and that way we'll have it when the 7 bad years come. And Pharaoh makes an amazing statement. He says, can we find anyone else with whom the Spirit of God is? So God is still with Joseph even in this, and people are still recognizing that God is with Joseph. So here's what happens to Joseph. He's remembered by the butler, but then he's rewarded by Pharaoh. He's rewarded by Pharaoh. Pharaoh makes him second in command in all the kingdom. So in one day, Joseph goes from being in the prison, now he's the second most powerful person in Egypt. The only one who could command Joseph would be Pharaoh himself. And Pharaoh says, I want you to be in charge of this. So Joseph does a fantastic job as he gathers the food. So they've got the 7 good years. This is happening. And all of a sudden the bad years come. And the people come to Pharaoh and they say, Pharaoh, what do we do? And he says, go to Joseph. Go, whatever he tells you to do, go and do it. Joseph was extremely trusted by Pharaoh. He says, whatever he does. So Joseph starts selling to the Egyptians, and they have food. Well, this famine did not just hit Egypt. It hit all the surrounding areas. So people from all over are now coming into Egypt to buy food. And the famine hit in a particular spot Joseph would be very familiar with. His own home. Even his family felt the effects of the famine, of having no food. So they learned that there's food in Egypt, so the 10 brothers, all right, there are 11, but 10 of them go down to Egypt, of Joseph's brothers, to buy food. And they have to buy from a specific person. His name is Joseph. Now, I thought about this. Do you think Joseph, remember his dream from last week, and his brothers had come and bowed down to him? Do you think Joseph's always had in the back of his mind, I'm going to see my family again, and this is going to take place? Well, one day, Joseph's there, people are in line, they're coming, he's selling, he's busy, he's taking toll of what's happening and subtract what's being taken away and what we're bringing in, and all of a sudden, maybe he sees 10 figures. These don't look like Egyptians. And we've got people coming from all over. They even look a little different from the people that have been coming from other places. And it's 10, and maybe as they get closer, Joseph begins to realize, those are my brothers. And they would have come, and if they would have come before him, they would have bowed down before Joseph, being the second most powerful man in Egypt. So from that point, what takes place is Joseph basically puts in kind of a series of tests with his brothers, and he calls them spies. They're like, we're not spies, we're just coming to eat. I promise you, we're not spies. We were hungry, we came to get food. Joseph says, no, you are spies. Well, eventually what happens is Joseph puts them all in jail. Eventually, they said, we're 11 brothers. He says, I want you to get your other brother, leave one brother here in jail with me, go get the other brother, bring him back. So that way I'll know that you're telling the truth. Now, Joseph did know that he had 11 brothers, but he wanted to see his other brother. So he sends them away. The one brother's there. The 10 brothers go. They end up coming back with Benjamin, all right, the youngest of all the brothers. And Joseph had sent them away, and he'd actually put the money in their sacks, so he's just making them look guilty of what's going on and the fact that they might be spies. So eventually they come back. They get sent out again, but this time they place Joseph's cup in Benjamin's bag, and now the brothers think they're in huge trouble because now it looks like they've stolen something from the second most powerful person in Egypt. And so they're brought back, and they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? And Joseph had been talking to them through an interpreter, and they had been talking all amongst themselves, but he could hear everything they said. Well, finally he sends everybody out of the room, and he reveals himself. He shows himself to his brothers. And this is what we call a jaw-dropping moment. If you've ever heard that phrase, the Bible actually says that they could not say anything because they were troubled at his presence, okay? Yes, I imagine that is exactly what happened. Their jaws hit the floor. They realize this is Joseph. What do you think would be the first thing that comes into their mind? This is the one we sold and we hated. He's now the most powerful person in Egypt. Joseph, all he would have had to do was speak one word and they would have been gone. No questions asked. And they thought, oh no, this is it. This is God punishing us for all the evil that we did to Joseph. Now this is coming back. Well, Joseph shows love to his brothers, and he shows kindness to his brothers, actually his entire family. And he brings the entire family down to Egypt, and they live there. And all the while, his brothers, maybe they're waiting. Okay, when's the day Joseph's going to maybe take revenge on us? And then the father, Joseph's father comes down. The entire family's down in Egypt. And eventually, the father dies. And the brothers say, okay, this is going to be the time. He wouldn't kill us while our father was alive. Now that our father's dead, we are surely going to be gone. Joseph's going to kill us. And they come to Joseph, and Joseph says these words. He says, you meant evil against me. You did wrong against me. And even there's a point in the scriptures where they come to Joseph and they said, we did evil against you. We understand that. We've sinned. And Joseph says, you meant to do evil against me. But he says, but God meant it for good. God sent me ahead of you, he says, to preserve much people alive. God sent me here so that I could spare lives, not just in Egypt, not just the entire world, but my family. So even though you did something that you meant for evil, God took it and he made it good. Is that not the goodness of God displayed in our lives? There are going to be things in our lives. There are things that have probably already taken place in your life that you would rather not have had taken place. Maybe it's been a loved one passing away, or a loved one getting really sick, or maybe a family issue that's happened, or maybe just something you might think is even being small, but things that you would not have wished to happen. But you know what? God works things out for good. The Bible tells us that in the book of Romans, that to those that love him, God works things together for good. And Joseph understood that God meant all of this to happen so that the goodness of God could be shown to the entire world. I don't know everything that's going on in your life right now. I've got a little bit of an idea because we've all kind of been in the same boat for the last 2 months of fighting against fear and focusing on God's goodness to us. And I don't know exactly what you're going through, but God does. And because he created you, he knows you. And because he created you, he values you and he cares for you. So no matter what may be going on in your life right now, and sometimes things happen in our lives because we make bad decisions, but even God sometimes takes those things a lot of the time and works them out for good and just proves that he is God over and over again. So as we've looked at the story of Joseph in a few minutes, Joseph lived to be 110 years old. He was 17 when we found him in Genesis 37. By the time we get to Genesis 41, he's 30 years old. So 13 years had taken place from the time he was sold to the time he gets promoted in Egypt. And he stays in Egypt another 80 years. He dies at the age of 110. And I believe if we were to talk to Joseph from year 1 to year 110, year 17 to year 30, that window, and even year 30 to year 110, I think Joseph's message would be the same to us. That God is good and God is always, always with us. Don't forget those two things. That's what Joseph's life teaches us, that God is always with us and God works things for good and he is good. And it's not based on what happens. It's based on who he is and what he does for you and for me. Hope to see you guys soon. Stay safe, stay well.